class. Hopefully all is going well with you. And the readings that you're supposed to do regarding the Fourth Amendment, we're pretty much focusing on the exclusionary rule and the cases that kind of center around that. And so the first reading that you had in Mapp versus Ohio kind of set the standard for the exclusionary rule. And of course, in that case, basically what had happened is that the police had come in looking for a fugitive and then finding no fugitive, but they did discover obscene material and decided to arrest Mapp on those charges. And of course, in trial, she was found guilty for possessing those obscene materials. Now, when the court heard that case, they basically said that you can't just take whatever evidence. That, again, it's an admittedly illegal search of the home in order to find this fugitive, and that any evidence obtained through that search is therefore not admissible in court. You have to dismiss it or exclude it. And so this kind of set in motion the exclusionary clause or rule in regards to obtaining evidence and how that evidence is obtained. Now, there have been a number of cases that then have redefined the exclusionary rule in a number of ways. And so the next reading you had would have been then Massachusetts versus Shepherd. And in that case, here you have police trying to get a warrant to do a search, right, to do a legal search. But of course, there was a time frame issue. The police believed they had gone and gotten what they needed in the correct procedure and manner. They then did the search. They found the evidence. They arrested the individual. And of course, then the lawyers, the defense lawyers, said, well, this wasn't a legal warrant, that there had been some discrepancies and some issues with it as to how it was obtained. And therefore, it had to be dismissed. And the courts accepted that. But when it got to the Supreme Court, they looked at that and said, well, you know what? There was basically a reasonable basis for what the police believed was a legitimate warrant, and they acted perfectly within what they believed to be legal means. And therefore, no, it didn't have to be excluded, that evidence still could be used. And so that's where a number of these court cases dive into then, is what, under the exclusionary rule umbrella, are there some exceptions in? And so Massachusetts versus Shepherd shows you one of those exceptions. Another one then is Nix versus Williams. And in this case, again, after confessing to a murder and then informing police as to where that body would be found, they used that evidence to find the body. And of course, there you have a guilty charge by the evidence of having this body for the murder. But of course, the lawyers are going to say that this evidence was obtained through basically an illegal means, that he coerced him into a confession, and that the evidence was only discovered because of the information given by the defendant. And in this case, once again, the Supreme Court heard it and said, well, that's not necessarily true, because the search for the missing individual who was murdered was in close enough proximity to assume that evidence would have been discovered anyway. That you can't assume necessarily that the only way they found it was through the confession of the defendant, and thus the evidence could be used in this case. And so once again, kind of an exclusionary rule exception, if you will. All right. And so another one that we had that I had you read was New Jersey versus TLO. Now this has to do with school searches. And of course, in this one, TLO, the initials to help protect the individual being a minor, was charged with, there was basically smoking in school. So they were brought into the principal's office, and of course, they denied it. And TLO, they did a search of her purse. And of course, not only did they find cigarettes, but they found marijuana, they found papers, they found money. Obviously, she was dealing within school. And of course, this set in motion a suspension, expulsion, and all sorts of other things that eventually the family will sue, saying, well, it was an illegal search. You didn't have the right to search her purse. You didn't have a warrant. There were all these issues. And so the question then being, can schools do a warrantless search on their premise during the school day? And of course, the Supreme Court in this case came down and said that although warrantless searches are still, not looked upon as being the way to do things, but schools, being as they may and having to kind of keep a sense of safety within their halls, can perform warrantless searches if there's a rational basis for that. All right, if they have evidence or probable cause, I guess is the best way to put it, that warrantless searches can be done in schools in this case. And so the New Jersey versus TLO case kind of set that in motion as well. All right. And then the final case that I had you look at was Greenwood versus California, California versus Greenwood. And in this case, I just find this one interesting because, again, it has to do with something that most people wouldn't even think about. Again, trying to convict somebody of drug use and drug possession and selling and other things. They searched his garbage. California police, they searched Greenwood's garbage, and they found what they wanted, and they needed, and they convicted Greenwood for possession based on the garbage that was put outside. And of course, they said, well, that wasn't a warrant. You didn't have a warrant to search the garbage, therefore, that had to be dismissed. The exclusionary rule. And of course, here the courts ruled that the Supreme Court ruled that anytime you put garbage out on the curb, anybody has access to it, whether it be animals or vagrants or anybody who wants to come by. And so there is no privacy that's expected there, and no warrant is needed to search somebody's garbage that is put out on the curb. And so that's just kind of another odd example, I guess, of the kind of exceptions to the exclusionary rules. But the Fourth Amendment is there to protect us from any government abuse. And the whole purpose, of course, is to make sure that police officers and law officials abide by the law and protect, and how, as it protects our rights against abuse of that power. But even within the context of searches and seizures and those type of things, sometimes that evidence is excluded and tossed out. And other times, well, the exclusionary rule has exceptions to it. And so those are some of the cases that deal with it. So now, moving forward, we're going to be looking at the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. Fifth Amendment has quite a bit to it in regards to due process and again, the rights we have as individuals once we are charged with a crime. And that's kind of where the Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and even the Eighth Amendments kind of go to as well. Once we're charged with a crime, if that ever does happen, what rights are we afforded? And so that's what we'll be looking at next time. All right. Again, stay safe, stay well out there, and hope everybody is healthy.